So guys, we're back again with another episode. Today we go into all things UAE football, and not just present day, but we go back a good 30, 40 years. We're talking to Ali Khaled, accomplished journalist and overall, football aficionado. Grew up in the UAE, has tons of memories from the UAE's first forays into international football, qualifying for that World Cup. We talk about their current generation and his landmark documentary about that seminal achievement of getting to the World Cup in 1990. Stay tuned. This episode is absolutely interesting if you're a big fan of Gulf football.
I grew up in Abu Dhabi, so
I
got into football while living in Abu Dhabi. Went to college in the UK. Obviously, I'd supported Liverpool for a lot longer than that, and then lived in the UK for quite a long time, and so on. But yeah, I mean, just grew up here. So although I'm not Emirati, I'm Palestinian. So
okay, what was that like then? I mean, sort of you grew up over in Abu Dhabi, born and raised over there. It must have been, what was that in the 70s that you were in Abu Dhabi?
I was born. I'm 51 now, so I was born in Lebanon. But my parents already lived here. My parents already had moved to Abu Dhabi in like 67. I mean, there was hardly any here. Yeah, my parents were some of the first ones here. But I was born in Lebanon. I'm a Lebanese. I've got a Lebanese passport. And then just grew up here. Went to school in Abu Dhabi.
Okay. And to sort of take that into, we all know that the UAE, at the time, I think when you said 1967, it wasn't even a nation, right? I mean, it became a nation in 1971, as we all know.
Yeah.
Growing up here, what was football like at the time from what you can recall?
Right. So it was one of the few things that we did. So we played a lot of football. I mean, I started playing for as long as I remember. It's the first thing that I did, was play football. Back in the 70s, it really was like very little on TV, especially international football. So live football was like you'd get 3 live games a year, like in the late.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you'd get the FA Cup, get England, Scotland, and the European Cup. Those were 3 of them. Later on, the Cup Winners' Cup and the UEFA Cup came along, but you would get and the League Cup. But like in those days, those were the 3 games that you were guaranteed. So so where you got like the rest of the football international was like either from newsreels, or the show that I got into was like they do these like summary, like weekly summary programs. It was called Big League Soccer, and it was presented by Brian Moore. And they do so it'd be like it'll come a week late kind of thing, and it'll wrap up sort of the weekend's action in England. And there was another one called The Road to Wembley, which was about the FA Cup. So those were like sort of the highlighted shows, and you only got 3 league games. So I was quite young. I was like maybe like 6 when I sort of have vague memories of watching Liverpool on these shows, and Keegan was playing. This would be like about 76, and I was like, they look like they're very good, So I'm going for this team, So I was a glory hunter, I was only 6, but actually after that I got like a really good memories of the coming years, like my interest in it. Although I was quite young, like 6 and 7, I got into it really quickly. I remember these like the 1977 FA Cup final, when Liverpool lost to Man United, and then a few days later they won the first European Cup. I remember those quite well. I was 7. So, my memories of that, watching them with my dad and all that, are pretty strong,
Yeah.
And then, those late 70s, people talk about the magic of the FA Cup now, but it really was like that. They were like, it seemed to me like Arsenal were in it every year, and, Man United were in it a lot. Like Liverpool were never in the cup final, but like the 78, 79, 80 cup finals were all Arsenal cup finals, as you know, and
not much has changed.
I mean, the 79 one, is unbelievable. I mean, like you talk about like the best cup finals, and that will always be the best one. I mean, nothing can tell you, Arsenal 2-0 up, Man United score 2 goals in the last 5 minutes, and then Arsenal go up and score. Alan Sunderland scores again. So I was really well. And I remember the one after was like also stuck in my memory, the 1981, because it's the last time a team from outside the top flight won it. West Ham beat Arsenal, and what I remember about that was it's one of the first games that I taped on VHS, and I ended up like watching it over and over and over, and Trevor Brooking was just incredible in that, So it's one of those games that sort of I have a really strong memory of, probably more because I've watched it so many times since then. But yeah, those late 70s, early 80s, like cup finals are like really sort of ingrained in the memory, as were the England-Scotland games, and obviously we'd watch whatever we could of league football, which was not much, So like in those days you literally, because all the games were played on Saturday, get up on Sunday morning before school, you get the newspaper and there's a list of results. After that, one of the things that really sort of was like a major step forward for me in terms of football. And again, I talk mostly about English football. I was into like whatever else I could get international and all that, but with English football, again, it was like, say, in the late maybe 79 or 80, I got into listening to the radio broadcast on the BBC World Service. They had a show called Saturday Special, and this guy called Paddy Feeney, and it's like, amazing, like very, very nostalgic. And they go around the grounds in the during the first half, and they just like do updates and do other sports as well, like golf or tennis or whatever was going on. But then for the second half, they'd go to like one match of the day. And, this being the period that it was, there was a lot of Liverpool games. So there was a lot of, the guy goes, there's been a goal at Anfield, and they'd go and you'd hear the crowd and he goes, it's gone to the home side, and they'd be like, yeah. So, but then, that was something that I started to follow, obviously, live, catching the game live was amazing, and since I've always had a love of radio commentaries since then, obviously like these days hardly anyone listens to it, but I've always liked it because of that.
There was always something poetic about listening to football on the radio. I mean, the way that, especially when you had a great, a very articulate commentator, it would always be kind of poetic. And like, the language that they use really kind of painted a vivid picture in your mind. Yeah. I mean,
it didn't work for me. I mean, I grew up here as a Rangers fan. You can't get Scottish Premier League on the TV now. Over here. So, I sort of spent my Rangers obsessed years, on internet radio. Nothing poetic about Scottish commentators, though, I've got to say. The complete opposite there, but I get what you mean. It adds a certain, you can't see the goal. You can't see what's happening. If you've got to sort of imagine it. And then I can only imagine like back in the 70s, it's not like you could go on YouTube and find the highlights after you've listened to it. You've just heard about a goal. You've got a picture in your mind. You might see it, a few months down the line on a highlight show or something. So definitely come a long way, but not in Scottish football. Yeah.
It was, and I'll tell you one thing about, the names, again, stuck in my mind. Alan Green still does it, but he was fantastic, Ron Jones, and they used to have always like, they'd have like co-commentators there. They used to have like really vivid memories of those. And, but like every attack, you'd think a goal was going to go in, and like every time your team's attacking, you're like, that's it, we're going to concede, because there's, like the way they describe it. And then you see it later and you're like, hang on, it sounded a lot more dangerous on the radio. But yeah, so I have really like happy memories of the radio, And one of the other things at the time that, again, part of the education we really got into it was like football magazines. I know people got into, like, I was either like Shoot magazine or Match, I would buy both. And I think in the early 80s, a lot of my friends who were a little bit younger than me, like were sort of, would buy both, but probably about like maybe late 80s or early 90s, So I think like about a good 8 or 9 years earlier, like Shoot was pretty, it was a pretty solid magazine. They had a lot of like columns by the players, whether they were ghostwritten or not, I'm not sure, but you're a 10-year-old and you're getting these things, and Ray Clements and Glenn Huddle and all these people are like writing columns. It was great, and like really educational. I think like gave you like a really solid base of, obviously you keep every magazine, you read it like 10 times, and I kept them for years after that as well. Like locked up somewhere in my mother's basement or something. So.
Yeah. So what about the football in the region though? What was happening in the 70s and 80s in this part of the world? Were you kind of following any teams here?
Yeah, I mean, I would watch the local football. I never really got it. I went to a few games. One of my neighbors, the kid who was a few years older than me, he liked Al Nassr. So we went to a few games. I'd go to a few games with him. But Al Nassr obviously was a Dubai club, so it was like when they came to Abu Dhabi at the time. We went to watch them. I'd watch them on TV. I always had a soft spot for Al Ain, and it was good, because they were always like quite a historic club, and as I grew up, like kept an eye on and went to quite a few matches there later on. When I was covering them, it was always nice, even in the old stadium. So it's quite nice link with the past. I never really got into it enough to support that. It was always like Liverpool had just sort of taken up all my time, but I would definitely watch a lot. We played a lot. I remember we played a lot of competitions at school. We played in Al Jazeera. Competitions that took place at Al Jazeera and all that. So the more interesting part of local football was, I think, the national team, and I think the Gulf Cup, back then, was huge. I mean, it was massive. Again, one of my early memories, talking about the earliest memories of football was in '76. Around the same time I got into Liverpool and all that. The Gulf Cup was played in Qatar, and in those days, Kuwait and Iraq were just amazing. They played football. Even if you watch it now, it was really high quality football.
Yeah.
It was not, it wasn't just sort of, oh, this is good compared to this, just for this region. It was really, really good. Very high level. The rest of the countries were not good. Even Saudi. So Saudi, UAE, Bahrain, Oman, all these countries, they would get thrashed by Iraq and Kuwait. 8-0 and 7-0 and all that. But Iraq and Kuwait sort of developed this rivalry starting in the mid '70s, which was amazing, and it kind of went on for a few years. The '76 was the Gulf Cup. Then it was some games in the Asia Cup. Then the qualifiers for the 1980 Olympics in Moscow, and eventually Kuwait won that. But eventually Iraq made it through because Syria dropped out. And then obviously Kuwait made the '82 World Cup, and with a famous game against France and all that. And then in '86 Iraq made the World Cup. So it was that 10-year period where they were really, really good. The UAE were not of that level. What happened with the UAE was they got Don Revie to come here from England.
Yeah, the whole scandal. Right?
It was a massive scandal at the time. And I remember I was in school at the time, and our football coach was from Newcastle, but I remember it was quite a big deal, and everyone was talking about it, and it never really worked out here. He left England in '77, managed the UAE for a few years. I think he brought in a lot of professionalism. He brought in a new mindset to, this is a country that was 6 years old. The FA and the football league was 5 years old. So he brought in a lot of professionals. He had his own ideas, but he'd come from managing England and the great Leeds team, which was played incredible football, but it was very physical, very pragmatic team as well and all that. And the ideas didn't translate really well here. I think speaking to players later on down the line and after they retired, a lot of them said that it's just didn't really fit in with the culture here. They were more, they enjoyed more playing with the Brazilian coaches that came down the line, because there was a lot more sort of enjoy yourself, kind of thing, rather being really, really structured, probably a 4-4-2 kind of thing. So the UAE until '79, I think what really did for Revie in the end was at the '79 Gulf Cup, they lost 7-0 to Kuwait, I think, and so that was kind of, the writing was on the wall. In came an Iranian coach, Hashmat Mahdi. Yeah, he was
still around Dubai. Actually, he's still here.
Very popular figure, and he did well. He kind of steadied the ship, if you want. He was coach in '82 when the UAE held the Gulf Cup for the first time. They played it at KRUSHTV Stadium in Abu Dhabi, which was a year old or a couple of years old. So that was the first really big event there, and that was a bit of a big deal. The UAE did okay. They were starting to improve, and I think they finished fourth eventually. Kuwait won it again, but I think even by then the Gulf Cup was not as great as it was in the 70s. But it is a competition that kind of held for a long time afterwards. Was really, really important. It comes around and it would be a big deal. But I think the difference was that by then all the countries were starting to at least be competitive enough to play in the Asia Cup qualifiers and the World Cup qualifiers. And obviously Kuwait got to the World Cup in '82. The UAE got really close to Mexico '86. I think people forget how close they got. They were like seconds away from beating Iraq. There was one more match after that, but it was almost like that was the final against Iraq. And they conceded the last minute goal. It was incredible, really, that the Emirates came so close. When you're an underdog, you don't really get too many chances. You get like this once in a lifetime opportunity. So it's incredible that they came so close in '85 to qualifying for Mexico, lost, but then 4 years later, with a team that wasn't really as good as the previous one, managed to get to Italy.
We'll get to that in a sec. Actually, I'm really curious to hear about your thoughts on that, because I think you penned a really interesting article. You told some really interesting stories about that. But just on the Gulf Cup, you recently shared an article that you had written about the best match you'd ever seen at a Gulf Cup between Saudi and the UAE. I think, was it the atmosphere? Can you talk to us about that? Because I had a read of that and I was fascinated, and I'd love to hear it. From your words.
I was still living in Abu Dhabi at the time. It was my last year of school, and I think it was the first time for me that I'd always been sort of like really into when it came to the Gulf Cup. I would watch Kuwait and Iraq, because they were these two great teams that kept qualifying to all the big tournaments and winning the Asian Cup and getting to the Olympics and getting to the World. Both of them got to the World Cup. So in '88 was the first time that the UAE were good enough to challenge for the title. And so there was like a nice little buzz going on, and I think which I hadn't seen before, and everyone really got into it. I think people in the country were like really behind the team. I think that there was a certain apathy that existed sometimes before when the team wasn't good enough, which by the way still exists now when the team is not good enough as well. But I think in '88 when they played it in Saudi, it was really, really interesting. And then this game came along, and it was not decisive. It's kind of like halfway through. It was a round-robin tournament, as the Gulf Cup used to be. So everybody plays everyone. And it came halfway through. I think maybe it was the fourth match for the UAE and maybe the third for Saudi, or fourth for both of them. And it was just incredible. I'd never seen a crowd. We were not used to seeing crowds this big. At least in the Emirates, I hadn't seen too many crowds that big, and even when you had like full stadiums, they tend to be like quite small, but King Fahd Stadium was massive, and the Saudi support was just unbelievable. Even we were watching it on TV, and it was just amazing. Like the noise throughout. And what was great was the UAE played so well, took a 2-goal lead, and they had the striker Zuhair Khaled, who was just so gifted, played for Al Wasl. I mean, you always like to talk about like, oh, was no one ever good enough to probably play abroad and all that? I think he probably was. I mean, there's lots of different reasons why they don't end up playing, which we can't talk about. But I think he was absolutely gifted. He was a bit of a, controversial guy. Like got himself into trouble occasionally, so that didn't help. So by the time they played in the World Cup a couple of years later, he was not first choice, but he was at the top of his game then. And kind of reminded me. I know it's a massive comparison, but looking back, he was a bit like Robbie Fowler. Like it hit, everything was on target. He was very quick. Like left foot, right foot, he will just hit the target. And he was incredible. The UAE took a 2-0 lead. We were so excited. We were like, yeah, this could be it. Like if they win this game, they go top. A few more games, and they could wrap up the Gulf Cup, But Saudi came back in the second half. It was just an incredible game, and I think it's like poetic that the equalizer came really late, and it came from a guy called Majid Abdullah, who's Saudi's greatest ever player, or at least at the time, he was Saudi's greatest player and one of the greatest golf players as well. So, that stands out. I think in more recent times, the UAE won the Gulf Cup a couple of times. I think when they won it here in 2007, there was a lot of excitement of the semi-final and final were great games. And there's been a lot of games. And for a while, I was living outside, so I missed quite a few games. But that one I always remember from like my childhood. Yeah.
Do you think that sort of competitive spirit? I mean, again, I grew up here, and I remember, throughout the 90s, these Gulf Cups. I think there was the Arab Cup as well that was going on at the same time. The World Cup qualifiers, when the UAE would come up against Saudi Arabia, or they play in these tournaments, there was just such a rivalry, and there were crowds there. And I remember the '96 Asian Cup where the UAE played Saudi in the final, and it was kind of the end of that UAE's golden generation, in a way. And then they failed to make it to '98. But you had this. You mentioned it, that Kuwait were amazing until sort of the mid 80s, I would say. You then had Iraq kind of take over the mantle for a little bit. Then Saudi Arabia were winning youth tournaments in the 80s, doing really well on that front. They made it to '94 World Cup. You had the UAE getting to '99. You had this real sort of high standard almost when it came to teams around the Gulf. And would you say that's kind of drifted off now? In my opinion, I don't really see that intensity that we have.
Yeah, I think. With Kuwait and Iraq, I think there was reasons outside football, of course, and related to each other, really, with the war in 91 and all that. So I think there was reasons they never really recovered from that. They had their golden generations and all that. Yeah. Saudi, the interesting thing about Saudi is that, they actually won the AFC Asian Cup in '84 and '88, when others were qualifying to the World Cup, like both Kuwait, Iraq, and then the UAE, and they were winning the Asian Cup, And I think a lot of people sometimes forget that, but they didn't make it till like 96. The '94 World Cup, and then they won the Asia Cup in '96 again for the third time. So that again became like a golden generation, and I think Saudi is the only one of the countries that sort of exploited the momentum, and were struck while things were good. They've had their ups and downs, and it's weird that. They haven't won the Asia Cup since '96, considering how good they've been. But they qualified to 6 World Cups, which is unbelievable, really. 4 in a row, 5 in a row, sorry, and obviously 2018. So Saudi's the only one that really sort of kept that momentum, or at least even if they lost it, they regained it and really pushed on. I think the time for the UAE was in straight after the 1990 World Cup, this miracle of reaching there. They played against teams there, and I don't think it was like a lack of. I think the desire was there. They got Valery Lobanovsky who was this amazing manager who managed to revolutionary manager, and it just didn't work out. And after that, it was just constant changing. Nobody was allowed to properly take charge, and the golden generation that had got them to the World Cup, eventually sort of '96 Asia Cup final against Saudi was sort of really near the end of that. They never really captured that till you get 12 years or 11 or 12 years later. Yeah, Ismail Matar, they won the Gulf Cup. But really, the next time they had a serious group of players and a genuine team was the one that went to the Olympics in 2012, and then won the World Cup, and they went to the Asia Cup and all that. So the last 10 years they've had a good team, but I think between you could say between 1990 and 2010, that 20-year gap, they just did not exploit the momentum that getting to the World Cup had given them.
Yeah, but I mean, even till today, they're still they're still changing managers. Every at the drop of a dime. I mean, okay, Bert van Marwijk's in at the moment. He seems to have pulled together a decent squad. I mean, let's see what results he gets. But I guess there's just no patience, or there doesn't seem to be any patience. With the managers that they're bringing in. A few bad results, and it's like boom, heads on the chopping block. Next guy.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the only time I saw they gave anyone patience was with Mahdi Ali. So
yeah, correct.
I think it's just the stars aligned really, because I think from whether it was 2004 or 5, he was in charge of sort of the under 16s and then the under 17s and the under 18s, and so he was in charge of the same group of players. Under 23s, took them to the Olympics in 2010. Qualified in 2010, 11. They played in 2012 in London. Did really well, I think quite commendable the way they played. Omar Abdurrahman was emerging. And so they decided, right, we're going to take this generation and this coach to the seniors, and they promoted almost everyone. And then they won the Gulf Cup, again, within months. And then they had a period of really good couple of years, that developed all the way to the 2015 Asian Cup in Australia. I was lucky enough.
Unfortunately, they were only semi-finalists, mate. They're only semi-finalists.
I know. I was at that game. I was at the game in Newcastle. I qualified. I managed to get a media pass to go watch the tournament. I was working for a newspaper at the time, the national newspaper. So I went there, and the idea was that I'd follow the UAE matches as well as others, but really just sort of focus mostly on the UAE and see how long it takes. And obviously they were there for the whole month, So, but yeah, it was great. It was an amazing experience. We flew out to Melbourne for the opening, and then watched a few games there. I think because the UAE played 2 games in Canberra, I think that was my next stop.
Yeah.
Then we went to Brisbane, then Sydney, and then they got to the semi-final against Australia, and that was in Newcastle. And then they played obviously. And then the final, we went and watched that for Australia against South Korea. So it was an incredible month, and the UAE just were amazing. And one of the really interesting things was the reaction of the Australian media to the Emirati team. It was really, really cool. I think after the first game, Makhut scored a couple of goals against Qatar, and Omar Abdurrahman was just unbelievable,
Yeah.
And I think journalists, most of them knew him, but a few of them came and said, where have you been hiding this guy, and who is he? And then match after match, the second match, you'd see all these Australian kids waiting to get his autograph, outside the stadium. And then, by the third one, all the journalists were like, do you mind asking a few questions and translating for me and all that? And then by the time it got to the semi-final, I think, the morning of the semi-final, I can't remember which newspaper, but there was a local newspaper that I looked at, just had a picture of him, and it said, stop this man, which I thought was fantastic, and what a thing, for the UAE, an Emirati player to be at that level. And you remember.
I watched all the games, obviously, and I remember every game that the UAE played. Simon Hill was kind of the main commentator for the tournament, especially in English. Every game he was like, and there's Omar Abdulrahman, trialed at Man City, doing extremely well in the UAE league, bigging him up and kind of really just kind of dropping the stats and making him building up his profile for people that didn't know him, and keep an eye on this lad, and I think that really, really helps, when people continuously hear that, I've got to look out for this guy. Oh, look at his touch. Watch, and they really hype up.
It could have, you're absolutely right. It could have become one of those, just self-fulfilling prophecies. You talk about someone so much, so you end up talking about him even more. But he, it is. But he actually performed. And I think the highlight of the tournament for me. There were many highlights. I think the final was incredible. The final required the experience, and I think at the final whistle, seeing some of my Australian friends who were the journalists, they were below us in the tribune, and I think that you had to be there. It was just an amazing moment. But similarly for us, if you're going to just talk about the UAE, I think in the quarterfinal they played Japan, and it was in Sydney. and it had been raining. It wasn't like quite a full stadium, and there was a small group of UAE fans. And UAE took an early lead. Ali Khaled scored a great volley, if you remember, and they held it till really late. And I think Japan like really battered them, and then got the equalizer. I think there was 10 minutes left, and I would have bet my life at that point that it will not go to extra time. I was like, there's absolutely no chance this is going to extra time. Japan will win this. It went to extra time, and I don't know, they just defended incredibly. So Mohamed Salah was just a giant, I think he got mad.
For me, that was UAE's final, to be honest, because then come the next game against Australia, you felt that some of that energy had gone, and then of course Australia kind of came out firing, took an early lead, dominating, and won it 2-0.
Australia were so good in that, like for the opening period, they killed the game. The UAE looked tired. With massive letdown in a way, I mean, I wouldn't blame the players so much because they were playing against the best team in the tournament, but they just looked tired. They were not inspired. Omar Abdurrahman tried things, but he was not, he was not really creating anything. And clearly, when things go bad, you try and put as much, on his responsibility on him. And so he's trying to get Ali Khaled like with these passes. He's trying to find the channels, but like Australia was so solid. They like. Again, I don't remember the match too well, the details, but I don't remember many chances for the UAE. I mean, it didn't look to me like at any point they would get back into it. You were hoping for that one goal, maybe make a game of it.
No,
never. So the Japan game really was the highlight, and I remember it was quite emotional. It finished. We went to the press conference, and by that point, we obviously. A lot of the Arabic journalists, Arab language journalists, they had some previous relationships with a lot of the players and the coaching. They'd been working for a long time. I personally didn't, but by that point, I was getting to know them quite well, and it was really, really made like sort of memorable moments. They came in and they just came over to us and they hugged everyone and they were really happy, and it just looked like a bunch of kids, and. And like they did the press conference. They came out and they just like we went to the sort of the players' zone and just chatted to them. And if you remember, Omar Abdurrahman did the Panenka penalty. Like it was the first one. That really was my friend Paul, this guy called Paul Williams, is an Australian journalist. He had told me, Paul, yeah, so Paul had told me all along it's going to be a UAE Australia final, and then when Omar Abdurrahman did the penalty, he looked up and he's like, so it was, like everything was so amazing. And then at the end, the players went and sang the national anthem in front of the small group of fans, and there was this one guy they put the camera on him and he was crying and all that. One of the very few wearing like the kandura and all that, and so he became like a celebrity overnight, And when on the semi-final, he was on the bus with us, so we were like interviewing him, and he's the guy who was like. So there's like really, really great moments from that, and I think that whole tournament was really the peak for that generation. And they never it plateaued after that. They never.
Unpopular opinion from my side. Feel free to debate. I think that team as a whole, the group, the so-called second golden generation, Mahdi Ali, I think they massively underachieved.
I think you're right.
Potential.
I wouldn't say that's unpopular. I think that's the reality of it, right?
You're talking about two Gulf Cups and a third place finish at the Asian Cup, and Amouri gets a trial at Man City. And granted, they had this coach that was special. Kept this group of players alive, took them to the Olympics, where South Korea beat Team GB at that Olympics. So it wasn't. I wouldn't say the standard was that high. Over there, I think given the gap in Asian football, especially at that time, if you look at the Gulf, Saudi Arabia were kind of underachieving. They didn't qualify for the 2010 World Cup. Iran didn't qualify for the 2010 World Cup. Asian football, when the UAE were on the up, they didn't really take advantage of what they had, in my opinion.
I think you're 100% right. I think it's a massively, massive missed opportunity. And in fact, you said you were quite generous as well because you gave them the 2007 Gulf Cup. I would say that was a different generation. That was a different team. The only real link was maybe Ismail Matan and a few others. Really, like the kids that were coming through the Olympic team was completely different. I thought Mahdi Ali did brilliant and all that. And if you remember, like the next World Cup qualifying campaign for 2018 started off amazingly. They beat Japan in Japan, and I was like, that's it, But a few days later, Australia again, came here and beat them 1-0. I think Tim Cahill scored a goal.
He did.
And really, again, it's. I think the Asia Cup was, sort of like the height of that team. It massively plateaued after that, and then dropped off.
Yeah. They're not even nearly men. It's not like that. You mentioned that the UAE almost made it to the '86 World Cup. They were far off. I don't really recall them getting close to World Cup. You look at a team like Iraq, for example, in the 2000s. They won the Asian Cup.
Yeah.
The entire thing, having gone through war, having complete lack of resources and players that can't make it to training, and players at the time still playing in Europe, players getting to Europe. Nashat Akram played there for a while. Ali Adnan went to Europe. You had them qualify for the Olympics in 2004 and beat Portugal. Why have the UAE been unable to get to that level and sustain it? Is it? It's not it's not resources. What's the issue? Do you think?
I just wanted to go back to the point you made. Like, they didn't get close. They actually, if you remember, like near the end of the qualification campaign for Russia, they actually beat Saudi Arabia, who ended up qualifying. And even beating them, they were still nowhere, not even close. You can imagine how badly they've done to the point where they actually beat the team. And it looked like they had just sort of ruined Saudi's chances, but it really didn't help themselves. And I think that was when Bauza was manager for 2 games before he moved on. A really messy time. I think letting go of Mahdi Ali, not necessarily the wrong decision. I know, it could have, a lot of people said, and maybe in hindsight correctly, I wanted him to stay, but maybe he'd taken them as far as they could. But that only works if there's a plan in place, and whoever comes afterwards is given a chance and develop. And there wasn't, So, and regarding sort of taking, whenever this platform comes, to improve things, seems like a lot of missed opportunities. We talk about why, Iraqi players playing in Europe, why aren't Emirati players? And it's a really good point. I remember right at the end of Australia, 2015. By the end, I think that was when Omar Abdurrahman, Ali Makout, stock was at its highest, and there was, there was talk of a club from Germany looking at Ali Makout. Everybody was talking about Omar Abdurrahman, all that, and then a lot of us were actively saying, just go, go.
Yeah.
The knock-on effect will be huge. It shows other younger players what can be achieved.
But not just go anywhere. That's the thing. I think go to any club in Europe.
Just go to Europe and take that first step. Be a pioneer. And I think if you'd done that, the knock-on effect is huge. You're you become a better player. You come back to the national team a better player. And you improve the national team anyway. But the people you leave behind, it gives the next guy the chance to be the Omar Abdurrahman in the Euro, rather than have that obsession with him all the time. And again, these opportunities were not taken. And I remember it was just a few months. We were all saying, okay, this could be it. And he signed a contract with Al Ain, a really good contract, and which was going to take him to till he was 28, maybe. I can't remember exactly. And you think, well, that's the window gone, really. You don't want to go there when you're. There's a lot of reasons, and look, there is a lot of legitimate reasons as well. We don't know what the guy's like. He's famously. Although he looks great and all that, he hasn't done too many interviews or really in-depth interviews. And he was happy with his family. Alain really had given him and his family an incredible opportunity with his brothers and all that. And so, you can't knock the loyalty there. And maybe he's just comfortable here and all that. You just want these guys to get out of the comfort zone and really try for the bigger.
Sorry, if I recall around that time, around 2012, 2013, was that Hamdan Kamali went to Lyon for a trial. He was there for 6 months, and everyone was like, "Wow, future UAE captain, and he'll do amazing things." But
don't go to Lyon. Go to who was it? Faisal Khalil. I think he went to a French second division team. Yeah, and I remember that being announced, and nothing happened there. But I think there's this if you make it in the UAE and you are superstardom, you know, a Kamali or a Mabhout or a Omar Abdurrahman, you've got to go to Man City, or you've got to go to Lyon, or you've got to go to, I don't know, Willem II in Holland.
Yeah.
You know, go to Bari in Serie B. You know, go to you know, or something like that.
Like a lower level, you know,
European
Liga team. You know,
Yeah.
it's good because again, you know, the culture of football. It's kind of something maybe. I know it gets very cold in Spain, by the way, but at least, you know, like, you know, it's, you know, there is certain areas which is warm weather. I think there's the culture of football is a little bit not as intense, you know, and just purely physically here, like the Premier League, you know. And you would have thought they'd get advised on that, you know. But I think sort of like a lot of people were happy with the status quo, people around them, you know. I think there's definitely an element of them not wanting to upset maybe the club nurtured them and all that, you know. There's part of the culture here, you know. And again, you know, like, I mean, there's a certain element of respect for that, you know. It's just a shame for us, you know, like, who just wanted to see him rolling. I mean, you know, he could come back and say, look, I wanted to be around my family. I wanted to be around my brothers, my mom and my dad and everyone. And this club treated me incredibly well and took care of me and my family throughout, and my brothers, because they were like at Alain, you know. And you can't really argue, you know, with that. But, you know, it is a shame. And again, these opportunities don't come around much, you know, like, you know, him and Ali Mabhout were when you look at Ali Mabhout here, and he's brilliant. He's scoring a hat-trick. And you think, you know, how much could he have taken this and done abroad? You know, he might, you know, they might have failed, but at least you know.
Yeah. Do you see it changing more? I mean, like, now that, you know, the UAE seem more open to, you know, getting expats involved in the team. I mean, if you've been born and raised here, you can start playing for clubs. I think I like the sound of Ali Saleh over at Al Wasl Club, the half Scottish, half Emirati player. You know, might have a more Western mindset, you know, be willing to go and play for Hibs or Hearts or something over in Scotland if he gets picked up. You know,
I honestly don't know. I mean, sadly, I don't see much change. I think there might be the other way, you know, as you mentioned, what you just said is there might be more integration of foreign players here, or like kids who have grown up here, which I think would be fantastic. You know, that would be really good. Do I see Emirati players? You know, no, for two reasons. Because I haven't seen any genuine change in attitude, and there's not that many good players who are good enough to go anyway, you know.
I was going to say, who are the next sort of players that could, you know, go through? I know the UAE are kicking off sort of their, you know, or getting back to their qualification campaign now for 2022. We saw them in the most recent Asian Cup here, not do too badly. I mean, they knocked out Australia. That's a bit of revenge. Ted and I were at that game. And then got, you know, hammered in the semi-final by Qatar. And, you know, again, Mabhout did stand out in that tournament. But is there anyone really now that you would say could be at that level? I don't personally see it.
I mean, you know, Al Jazeera's Khalfan Mubarak is quite good. You know, he's got a good, really, really good understanding with Ali Mabhout, and he's skillful. And but again, you know, I mean, you got to take these opportunities really quickly, and time flies. You know, you think of this guy, you know, like, oh, you know, this young kid coming through, but you know, before you know it, you're like, you know, you're 23 or 24. You got to make that move. You know, one of the big things here is like, how do you adapt to the culture? It applies to a lot of people. I was lucky enough to interview Mo Salah a few years back, and he spoke about his move to Switzerland, to Basel. And quite a few Egyptian players had done that as well before. Mohamed Zidane had done it, and a few others. But I remember Mohamed Zidane had done it. And
he El Neni as well.
He ended up at Dortmund.
El Neni at I think he came from Switzerland.
El Neni and Mo Salah both went from Arab contractors to Basel together. Zidane quite a while earlier went, and he went. He was like 17, and he went to Scandinavia. He told me he was like literally knocking on doors, you know, to see if anybody would. And he ended up winning the Bundesliga twice with Klopp's. You know, he came to Bani Yasser. But you know, speaking to Mo Salah, and again, he was lucky to, you know, it happened once, and he was just saying he couldn't speak English. You know, he couldn't. He went there not knowing, you know, how to communicate with anyone. You know, completely different culture. He was leaving his family behind and all that. I mean, his story's been told many times, but again, like someone, he was just so obsessed with being successful. And he was like, whatever comes up my way. And again, all these things, sound a bit cliched sometimes because sound like they're all just inspirational quotes. But he was saying, he goes, whatever came, he's like, I'll deal with it. Like in language, we'll find a way to deal with it. We'll learn English. The weather, I'll deal with it. Food, I'll just get used to different type of food. Like praying, whatever it is. You deal with it. And these things, I think a lot of people, a lot of players maybe here, and not just here, maybe in the Gulf and others, might just take them all as a massive big obstacle, like massive change of culture and all that. And when you think like that, it's quite scary, intimidating.
Words, right? Comfort zone.
Yeah,
that's the thing. I think that get out of it. You need to get out of it.
It's comfort zone, and also they end up being paid quite a lot by the club here. Like Omar Abdurrahman was being paid a lot. Probably like, I don't know, but like, it depends on, as you were mentioning, you don't have to go to the top clubs, go to maybe they wouldn't have paid him as much as he was making here. And look, it's again, like, looking after your family and looking after yourself, it's a valid decision, I remember speaking to Asamoah Gyan when he came to Al Ain from Sunderland. And there was a lot of criticism, and you can imagine, like, the British press was like, no ambition, he's left. And I ended up like chatting to him in like a year in, and he goes, look, I've got a lot of family living here. He goes, I like living in the UAE, he goes, it's a great lifestyle. Some people, pick Milan or London, ahead of maybe Manchester or Liverpool because of lifestyle, so, it's a valid concern, And he was saying, look, I like it here, He goes, people say, but I enjoy it here. I like life here. A lot of my friends from Africa have moved here, or my family, So, sometimes we forget, like, to them, these are like really, really solid reasons, like making a lot of money, living in a city you like, the lifestyle you like. So
sounds like a job, which is admittedly what that is for these guys, right? Like, who was it? Asuikoto, right? That played for Tottenham, that famously came out and said, oh, the fans keep asking me why I don't respect the shirt. And he's like, it's a job. If I get a better offer somewhere else, I'm going to go somewhere else. If I like where these are all the things you pick with a job. So arguably on the other side, if you're comfortable where you are, and you're getting paid well and you're doing what you're meant to be doing at a level where you can succeed and show off, why move?
Yeah. I mean, this is it. You almost like you keep going back and forth. You can't help but thinking of, do you not want to play in front of a full stadium? Do you not want to play like at these amazing stadiums in Europe where like there's like 30,000 people every week? And surely it'd be like the rest of us would kill to experience that at once. And you think there's got to be like a part of the professional who will want to be always thinking that's what I want. I honestly think Omar Abdurrahman did want to go, like for certain reasons, a combination of reasons, like we discussed, possibly the culture and all that, possibly like his sense of duty to the people who've looked after him and all that. But I think like probably left to his own devices, he would have gone, I think, if he was.
We'll never know.
By Samuel Jabber. I don't know if you remember back in the day. He went to Wolves, right?
I actually watched him play for Wolves, not live. I was living in the UK at the time, and I remember watching him. And
how did he do?
Not very well, to be honest. He was sub the game that I remember. The game that I saw, and I remember like I made it. Obviously, I wanted to watch that specifically because he was playing and all that, and he came on, and I don't know. He didn't look like he was in tune. Maybe it was terrible day. I think it was like raining and windy and all that. So again, not the best time to show off your skills and all that. So maybe that was a bit harsh. And I'm not sure how he did in the other games, but it was a very short stay. And I think people sometimes play up the whole, again, the culture, the weather, and all that. But you have to go in thinking like, right, I'll deal with it in the way Mo Salah. And if you go in thinking like, well, the weather's terrible here, I mean, that's straight off, you're not going to succeed. If that's just absolutely the most basic thing, is like it's going to be a bit cold. It's sad, but I remember him. I think there was another was another Saudi player in about like 2008, 2009. The guy who was Asian Player of the Year. Name.
Al-Muntashiri? Not him, surely.
Sorry?
Hamad Al-Muntashiri, not the defender. It was not him.
But I think there was a couple of other Saudi players who went and
Yasser Al-Qahtani. I remember him. Yasser Al-Qahtani had a trial at Man City.
He had a trial at Man City, and I mean, again, allegedly, you hear stories that again he went in probably with like high expectations, these are just stories that you hear. I don't know if it's true, but like he went in with the entourage and all that, like expecting high treatment. And I mean, one thing I heard with him and also with Omar Abdurrahman is that when you bring someone in for a trial, they try and sort of test them, see how mentally tough they are. So they kick them about, So you tell someone like Richard Dunn, not that Richard Dunn would have been subtle anyway, but like you'd be like, okay, like rough them up a little bit. Let's see how they react and all that. And so Richard Dunn, Vincent Kompany, and all that were like banging into Omar Abdurrahman, knocking him off. I, as far as I know, and from what I heard, and from what I watch of Omar Abdurrahman, he's very brave. One thing you cannot, accuse him. The guy gets kicked a lot. I mean, that is one kid who has been kicked a lot. He plays with a lot of confidence and he keeps his head up and all that. But again, I think this is it might be a little bit old-fashioned in the UK. Of like, let's see if they fancy it. Like pile into them early on and all that. But from what I heard, maybe Qahtani didn't. Omar, I'm not sure what happened there. But again, like you hear that. Having a trial at Man City should not be the high point of your career. It's sad. We keep going back to it, saying, well, this was they almost made it.
Yeah.
With Omar, I genuinely, like, I mean, I watch him and I see a brave player, and like bravery sometimes it's not sometimes, most of the time it's really not just being strong physically. I think when we especially when we talk about the Premier League, there's a lot of that. You need to be physically strong. I mean, David Silva is not really an imposing player, and he comes in and just one of the Premier League's greatest players and really brave. And for me, bravery is demanding the ball. Whatever the situation, calling for it, not being scared of being flattered, getting the ball. Bravery is playing the pass that no one else, like if it doesn't come off, the crowd getting your back, that's fine. Try it again. It's mental bravery rather than physical. It's not just the John Terry of like throwing your head on someone's boot, like that, is, a different type of bravery or whatever, like a physicality.
That's stupidity.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm like, it's not the first thing that should be like, like physicality should never be on top. And I think you're right. I mean, like I look at people like David Silva. There's been players who've signed for Liverpool that I watched, and I think physically, this guy, is perfect for the Premier League, and they have not succeeded, And then you get certain players who are like a little bit like David Silva, or someone who's not as aggressive and then like outwardly aggressive, but then they succeed. And I think that's the shame with Omar. Is that I do find that he was, as a player, he had the bravery to always demand the ball. He'll try different things. He plays with his head up. He always looked like he had time. And I thought that might help him in the Premier League, like where you get less time, but, get the ball. If you've got he's got a great first touch. He kills it. He's always looking up. He could have, there's a very good chance he might have failed miserably, but as you said, at least
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fair enough. So look, I just want to, we've gone kind of far in the future. We jumped, I think, from the 70s to now. But were you, we know your background is the journalist that you are and where you've been, but you actually produced or directed a documentary about the UAE National Team and their journey to that World Cup in 1990. What a journey! What a journey for a country that was 19 years old to do that. Never mind, gold. We're talking about golden generations going to Europe. I mean, they literally went, like you said, from the fridge to the World Cup. I mean, it's unbelievable. I've got family that were in that team, and they told me the same thing. Like, we're just a bunch of kids, like playing on the sand, we got picked up by a club, and then this national team comes along and puts us in, and all of a sudden, we're qualifying for the World Cup, arguably by the skin of their teeth, but they did it.
I mean, if you think about it, these guys were born. Every single member of the team was born before the UAE was even a country. They were all like born in the late 60s, 1970. But when the qualifying campaign happened, the country was 18 years old. They were like so all of these guys were born before there was a country. Their younger years, they were not in academies or like really massively organized leagues and all that. They were just literally playing on the dusty roads, on the sand in the Kandura and all that. So they got into school, and then the clubs picked them up, as you mentioned. But again, there was not like this massive culture of excellence that was happening here. So these were, these kids were growing, in the mid, to late 70s. The level of organized football was relatively modest, and so to actually qualify in 89 was incredible. And I mentioned it earlier, that team was not expected to do well. The team in 85 had managed to get themselves, they were playing really well. They were being coached by Carlos Alberto Pereira, and then in 87, 88, the team was quite good. As we mentioned, they played that Gulf Cup in Saudi, the famous game and all that. But by the time it went to the final qualifying group in 86, which was going to be played in Singapore, I would say out of the 6 teams, they were probably the least fancy. There was South Korea, who were already a powerhouse, Saudi, who were actually like at the time Asian champions. And champions, and like quite a good team. Qatar were quite decent. South Korea, we mentioned, and there was North Korea as well, and China. And China was not as good as, obviously not then, not now, but like they were not as good as the Koreas, but they were still obviously quite formidable, and literally if you had to put the UAE up against any of those teams, those other 5 teams, including Qatar and Saudi, you would have said they'd lose that. And that was the feeling. That's what happened when they actually flew out. There was not that excitement. This was not like, right, we're going and we've got a great chance to qualify and all that. If you look back on the newspapers of around that time, they were like, the news of them going to it was just like small columns in the sports pages. Really, I mean, it was just it was not even like the headline news. So there was like these small columns like, the team took off and all that. I mean, there's some hilarious stories. Like I'll get to the documentary we did, but like some of the stories. Apparently, 2 of the players were late to the flight, and they just kind of assumed that, well, they've gone without us, so let's just go have a bite, So they go to this like cafeteria and they're sitting down having, and somebody like drives in, picks them up, and say, "Look, the plane's waiting for you," Not very inspirational, They were like, imagine if you thought like, I've missed the flight. What am I going to do, But so they flew out, they got there, and the first 2 games, first game was like 0-0, and again, if I remember correctly, it was such a non-event. Abu Dhabi TV hadn't sent their own commentators for the first match, and everything changed with the second game against China. That's like, I think, is the most famous the greatest UAE match in my opinion, because they were losing 1-0. It was in just a mud bath really in Singapore. It had been raining, the pitch was all cut up, and they were 1-0 down, and it looked all up. If they had lost that game, pretty much that's it really. And then they scored 2 goals in the 89th and 90th minute, and it went crazy. Obviously, it was the reaction was huge. Like the players went crazy, and the media picked up on it, and suddenly everyone was interested again. And but the funny thing is, like you look back and it really is just an incredible match, and like turnaround. But it didn't it was not sort of if you were making well, we didn't make a documentary, but if you're like scripting it, that would be kind of like the turning point, and everything was amazing after. But the next 2 games they drew again. In fact, they only won that one match in
5 draws or something, or yeah.
Four draws and a win. They won that. It was like the others four. So it kind of like there was like the high point and euphoria of beating China, but then they drew the next game. But because of the way the whole games went, the results were going, they got into the last day, and I think pretty much everyone was. South Korea had already qualified, and the UAE were playing against them. So in a way that sort of played to their benefit, I guess, But everyone else still had mathematical chance. And things were changing throughout and all that. But the UAE were 1-0 down. They equalized in the first half. So again, what was happening in the UAE match was not particularly too dramatic. The drama was in the Qatar against China match, and the UAE needed Qatar to do them a favor, and China were winning 1-0, and then the exact same thing happened again. China conceded 2 goals in the last 2 minutes, and this is my favorite bit. Was the Emirati commentator Adnan Hamad, who's really, really famous. He's kind of made his name on the back of this match in a way. Somebody stuck their head into the room and said to him, Qatar have just scored, and he was like, he got confused, and then he realized that and the whistle went straight ahead, and then he realized the UAE had just qualified. So he starts crying and he starts going in Arabic, but he's starting to say, "I can see the lights of Rome from here," and this is what when we did the documentary, we called it the lights of Rome because of that moment.
Oh wow,
amazing! I mean, I struggle when I think about this achievement. Has it ever been in modern football? I mean, maybe in the 30s or whatever, you had these stories, but sort of in modern football, like there's nothing like it.
No,
right?
I don't think so. I mean, there's been at the time, I'm pretty sure the UAE was the smallest country to qualify to a World Cup. I think since then that has been gone to someone else. I'm not sure.
Like Iceland now and stuff like that, right? You've got like Iceland qualifying for the World Cup, and they've got such a small population. Like, great, but they've invested in academies. They've had players play at the highest level, winning the Champions League. They've got that history behind them, right?
I mean, people still say to me like, "Oh, they were all promised Mercedes cars and and this and that and all that." I mean, first of all, a lot of these stories are so not true. I mean, they were given, they were well received afterwards, but the idea that there was no huge amounts of money in the game in the UAE at the time. And they were all amateurs. They were like policemen and firemen and civil servants and all that. These were not like literally amateurs. And on top of that, they were not it was not a great team, like they became this golden generation. But people they even said it themselves. They said like you would struggle to name anyone beyond Adnan Taliani. Adnan Taliani was the greatest player, the finest player. But like when Kuwait qualified in '82, that was a great team. That was a team that had won the Asia Cup and played in the Olympics. They were a brilliant team. When Iraq qualified, it was the end of an era of like a really sort of solid 10 years of brilliance. And it didn't have that. It is absolutely incredible, and in a way, I mean, the reason I came up with the idea for the documentary was it was 2010, just before South Africa, the South Africa World Cup. So it was the 20th anniversary of that, and I wanted to write a story, just sort of like a 20th anniversary, look back and I started looking, just for people to interview, people to chat to, players. Online, all that, and I just realized like it's almost been forgotten. It's just like it's easily the greatest football achievement in country's history. And for me, it was really those 2 weeks in Singapore rather than the World Cup itself. I mean, the World Cup was fantastic in terms of like the name and all that. We'll get to that, but like it was the qualification, and that's what I really wanted to concentrate on. And so I started speaking to people, and I just realized it had become this forgotten story, So the idea was like, okay, well, this deserves maybe like a documentary. So I started putting the idea together and the matches and all that. Spoke to a lot of people, and the one thing and again, interesting, the one thing that a lot of people when sort of pushed remembered that commentary. A lot of people were like, yeah, I remember the commentator crying. I remember he was saying Anwar Roma, which is in Arabic for the lights of Rome. He's like Anwar Roma. So a lot of people remembered that. So again, that kind of added to the whole like, well, instead of about that, that's the name of it.
What's the reaction like out here? I mean, if they qualified now, the country, we'd probably have a national holiday.
Yeah.
We'd probably people parade in the streets, and it would be all over, and it would be big global news. What was it like back then here?
It was actually, as it happened, I was living in London at the time for that particular. Obviously, I was coming back a lot, but everybody just went out onto the streets, and there was celebrations like across the country. People would go on the corniche and beeping and all that. Again, you're talking about this is 10 days on from when nobody cared to even watch the first game, and it became that. And when they came back, Sheikh Zayed received them, like a presidential palace, and so it was great. I mean, I think a really good, pointer of just how everyone got caught up in it was that my mother called me, who's not really like into football much, she called me, she's like, hey, they qualified and all that, and I was living in the UK, so everybody got caught up in it. It was like amazing, the atmosphere and all that, and it kind of like built up all the way to Italy. Although there was like still one more twist in that the guy who got them to the World Cup, which is Mario Zagallo, and was let go, and they brought back Carlos Alberto Pereira. And as in the World Cup itself, they were dealt a pretty bad, hand. You talk about the people,
massively.
I mean, they had West Germany, who ended up winning the tournament, an incredible Yugoslavia team, and the Colombian team of
Valderrama,
and the rest. And they got beaten all 3 games, but still, I mean, to be honest, I mean, even the 5-1 against Germany, it was not a disgrace. Like they got beaten, it was expected.
Yeah.
And it was all about putting the UAE on the map, kind of thing, and literally some really cool stories from the World Cup. Like people would come up to them and say, where on the map are you? And yeah, that's where it's tiny, and so like a lot of the foreign press didn't know anything about the country, never mind the team. So that was obviously like a nice, great little end to that story. But as you mentioned before, like it was not used as a springboard to better things. I think they tried with Lobanovsky, but it's never happened. And like sadly now, the only way I can see the UAE qualifying to the World Cup is, once it's expanded, and
or in similar fashion. I mean, you've got to, it's an unremarkable team at the moment, but if other results go their way and they get 4 draws and a win, it could happen. You never know. But I mean, looking at them now, I think they're in a group with Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, if I'm not mistaken, kind of like the East Asian teams.
Yeah.
And they've lost 2 out of those, right? They're not sitting pretty at the moment.
No, not at all. Not at all, And the other thing is, again, and this touches on the point we were talking about, like what players could possibly play abroad and all that. And they, desperate measures, they've decided to bring in, 3 foreigners and given the Emirati national, so they can play 3 excellent players, but 3 players who are, one is already in his mid-30s and 2 in their early 30s, if I'm not mistaken. So the 2 Brazilians, and and it's a very, very like short-term solution. It's as short-term as it gets, and doesn't help that. I mean, it stops Emirati talent from progressing into those positions. And you think even if it is a successful project, even let's say by some miracle, they turn around and they actually do qualify. I mean, by the time of the next World Cup, these players are like 37, and like 33. I mean, are these? You'd want, if the UAE were to qualify for the World Cup, you'd want the youngest Emirati players to really be at the center of it, rather than a couple of mid to late 30s players.
I would love to see them there. I mean, now that we can freely travel, across the World Cup, thankfully been opened up again. It would be great to see them there. Fingers crossed.
I honestly, I genuinely thought, 4 years ago for Russia, after Australia, I really thought they were going to qualify. I mean, you can't be sure about these things; it's so difficult. But I thought they were so good in Australia, and with the system, with the way that it is, I figured Australia will qualify, South Korea will qualify, and then the UAE will be running for the next one. With Iran and all that, and Saudi, and they had done so much better than everyone in Australia, really. know, I mean, in many ways, you know, with the exception, I mean, they got knocked out by Australia. Australia were by some distance the best team in the tournament, I think. You know, but like you know, the UAE got battered by Japan, but they won. You know, and you could say like you know, playing against any of those, you know, the last 4 or even the last 8, you know, no fear anymore. You know, that's not how it worked out. You know, and I genuinely thought that this could be it. You know, and with this one, I was a lot less, you know, confident. And even in the first stage, which we're still at, you know, even then, you know, like as you said, they lost 2 matches. You know, so it's not like, you know, they're breezing through the easy stage and then they're going to hit the big boys. They're not even performing at the moment.
I think that might change, though. I think let's see. I think I'm interested to see what Van Marwijk can do with the squad, and he's obviously pulled together, you know, the most talent he can in the country. So, you know, should be interesting. But I think we'll see some better results coming out of, especially
I mean, like, I think there's also, he's an excellent manager. You know, he's really, really good. And I think, you know, from all the people that they've tried recently, you know, he's probably the best, you know, qualified for it. You know, he did a good job with Saudi. I think he's someone who looks at the whole system, does look at a lot of younger players. I mean, when he was with Saudi, you know, that was one of the things he looked. He'd look at a lot of the youth players and all that. It was not just like sort of top level, bring in, you know, whoever's on form. So they've got the right guy in. If you want to prove it, like, listen, I mean, even you know, I was being a bit negative about the 3 foreigners, but only in the bigger picture. But if they manage to get, like I said, they are meant to be a short-term solution. If they manage to get those results and they qualify, look, they're going to be heroes, you know, and then worry about the World Cup later. But I think the results will improve. I think there was just way too many chopping and changing before, and there was reasons for it as well. I mean, the bad results in the Asia Cup, which was held here. I mean, as you said, they did quite well. I mean, they got to the semi-final, but you know, obviously the manner of the loss didn't help, and then obviously they lost the Gulf Cup final on penalties when Omar Abdurrahman just a couple of penalties and all that. So, you know, there's like a lot of bad vibes. Omar Abdurrahman got injured. You know, I think there was a lot of stop-start. You know, while sort of like you could say from 2010 to 2015, it was just like sort of like just this improvement. You know, same players, same manager. You saw the improvement bit by bit. With, you know, while 2015 onwards, just like one manager after another, you know, ups and downs and all that. They need a bit of stability, and if he brings it, that'd be great. I mean, listen, I mean, you know, it's, if they don't make the World Cup, you know, the Asia Cup is not that far off, you know. So there's always something to look forward to, and let's hope so. They're just going to give them a chance, really.
UAE Argentina, you know, December 2022 in Doha. Can you imagine? like a home game.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I mean, it would be such an amazing experience, I think, if the UAE were to qualify. And like Saudi as well, of course. Qatar's already there. Saudi and the UAE, I mean, like, can you imagine like the amount of like traveling support that would go there, you know, and just the amount of like goodwill that would be behind them. And, you know, it's not great for either of them at the moment. Saudi's still slightly better position, I think. But, we'll wait and see.
Yeah. Very cool. I think, well, Ali, I mean, we're hitting an hour and 13 minutes at the moment. You know, we did say it was going to be about an hour chat. I mean, we could probably chat, you know, like this till the cows come home.
I know.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable. Look, you know, before we kind of ended, I did want to show you something that we have kind of put together. Dara and I have been working on a little project kind of on the side, and we do want to kind of pull it back to the 1990s, obviously UAE team that you were talking about. I'm just going to zoom in on my screen just quickly. I don't know if you can see this, but we've made a range of socks, and inspired by kits of the region, from, you know, retro kits of the region. I don't know if you recognize this one by any chance.
I did, you know, straight away with the, you know, with the top of it, definitely, you know. Yeah.
Cool. So we're having these made very soon, and we'll be sending you a pair, just obviously because of because of obviously your affiliation and affection for the UAE team of the 1990 World Cup. This is obviously the kit that the team wore in the infamous loss to West Germany 5-1.
Yeah, I think you can. The minute you look at the top of that straight away brings memories of, for sure. Yeah, brilliant.
So
thank you. I look forward to receiving that. That's really, really kind of you.
You're very welcome.
You know, happy to come back on your show anytime to talk about other things, and hopefully, maybe we'll have reasons to come back. You know, if they start, start winning matches. You know, we can come back.
Absolutely, I think this is the first of many. So, again, I think it's been really insightful, really great to hear your story. To kind of finally put, I guess a face to the name and to everything that we see. I think we connected on Twitter. We've been following each other, and I love the pieces that you write. So, thank you for joining us and for kind of sharing these stories.
No, absolutely. Listen, thank you. I've really, really enjoyed this, and honestly mean it. Just anytime you want, just give me a call and I'll be back on.
Absolutely. Great. Appreciate it, Ali. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Ali. Have a great night and all the best.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye.